I trusted my sister with everything, even the secret I never told anyone, our family's hidden trust fund. I had no idea she was spending it while I was living on the streets. Years went by, and I survived in ways I never imagined. But when I finally confronted her, I realized some betrayals cut deeper than hunger or cold. This one cut straight to my heart. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Storyflow Diaries. I never thought I'd end up homeless. I always believed life had a certain order, that if you worked hard, you'd be safe, that family would be family. My name is Emily, and for most of my life, I thought my sister Chloe and I were inseparable. We grew up in a small suburban neighborhood where our parents made sure we always had what we needed, but they were careful to teach us responsibility and independence. I was the older one, the reliable sister, the one who followed the rules and kept our lives running smoothly, while Chloe was the dreamer, the wild one who charmed everyone without even trying. I remember the day my parents told us about the trust fund. It was hidden, secret, something that wasn't discussed openly even within our own family. They made it clear it was meant for the child who would need it the most, the one who would face hardship or struggle, a cushion against the worst life could throw at them. At the time, it felt abstract, like a fairy tale they whispered about but never showed. Chloe and I nodded politely, but I never imagined that in a few years, it would become a lifeline I desperately needed and a weapon she would use against me. After college, life seemed fine at first. I had a decent job in a small publishing company, working long hours, never complaining. Chloe, meanwhile, bounced from one creative project to another, struggling to make ends meet. I tried to help when I could, lending money, giving advice, but she insisted she didn't need my handouts. I thought that was admirable, but looking back, it was probably a mask for her impatience with responsibility. It started with small cracks. I had a series of medical emergencies that left me drained financially and emotionally. At first, I leaned on my savings, but they dwindled fast. Rent, bills, prescriptions, it all added up, and soon I was behind. I asked Chloe for temporary help, and she agreed at first, but I started noticing odd comments about my money and the fund. I brushed it off. Why would she touch something meant for me? I trusted her. Then came the day I lost my apartment. The landlord had been patient, but eventually patience ran out. I packed what little I could carry and walked into the cold night, carrying a small bag of clothes, my laptop, and the remnants of my dignity. I had no family home to return to. My parents had passed years earlier, and no friends who could take me in long term. Chloe had a spare room, but her tone over the phone made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay. Those first nights on the street were brutal. The biting winter wind, the strangers' eyes, the smells of the city, it all pressed in on me until I felt like I might disappear into it. I learned quickly how to avoid trouble, how to find warm places to sleep, where to get meals, how to hide the tears when someone glanced my way. Every day was a battle against not just hunger, but despair. And through it all, I kept thinking about the trust fund, the secret my parents had left behind, the one that could have saved me. I had no idea at the time, but Chloe was already siphoning it, spending lavishly while I lived on the streets. I didn't find out about it immediately. Life on the streets consumes you. Time blurs. Survival becomes the only goal. But eventually, a chance encounter with a former colleague changed everything. She was walking past a park where I often slept, and she recognized me immediately. She asked how I was, and something in her voice, shock, pity, maybe guilt, made me spill everything. When she heard my story, she hesitated and then told me something I will never forget. Chloe had been spending my trust fund as if it were hers, Every payment she claimed to invest or save for emergencies had gone directly into her life. Trips, clothes, gadgets, even a small car she didn't need. I couldn't breathe at first. I stumbled back from the bench, my mind spinning, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood, maybe she had some explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. It was a statement that my suffering didn't matter, that my life was less important than her indulgences. From that moment on, my thoughts were consumed by anger and disbelief. How could my own sister, the one I had trusted implicitly, the one I had defended to friends and family for years, do this to me? The money wasn't hers to touch, and yet she did, freely and without hesitation. I tried calling, emailing, showing up at her apartment, but she avoided me. The first time I saw Chloe after discovering the truth, it wasn't in court. It was in a coffee shop of all places. I had gone there to meet with my legal advisor, and she happened to be sitting across the room, laughing at some joke on her phone, completely unaware that I had been watching her for years from the shadows. My heart tightened, a mix of anger, disbelief, and something I hated to admit, sadness. I wanted to storm across the table and shake her, demand answers, but I also knew that acting impulsively wouldn't help me reclaim what I had lost. Instead, I sat quietly, letting the weight of her betrayal settle over me. Every little indulgence she had purchased with my money flashed in my mind. The expensive clothes, the gadgets she flaunted, the vacation she posted pictures of online. She had lived a life of comfort while I had been struggling to survive. Every cold night I had spent under a bridge, every meal I had gone without, every tear I had shed in silence, it all traced back to her choices. And yet, seeing her so carefree, I realized she had no remorse, or at least no visible one. The court process was slow and exhausting. Chloe had hired a high-powered attorney, someone with a polished suit and a rehearsed smile, someone who tried to make me look like the desperate sister trying to claw back a few dollars. But I had something stronger than appearances. I had the truth. Every bank statement, every ledger, every receipt I had painstakingly collected over months of research painted a picture too clear to ignore. And I also had my story, the years I had endured, the nights I had survived on the streets, the humiliation and fear I had faced alone. I remember the first time the judge looked at me with genuine empathy. It wasn't a grand courtroom drama moment, but a quiet, almost imperceptible nod that said he understood. That small gesture gave me the courage to speak even more openly, to let myself be vulnerable in front of strangers. I described my life without sugarcoating it, without shame, and I could see some of the courtroom audience shifting uncomfortably. I wasn't just presenting facts, I was showing the human cost of Chloe's actions. Outside the courtroom, my life slowly started to change too. I found a temporary shelter that offered more stability than sleeping in parks and abandoned buildings. I learned how to manage my money again, starting with the small payments my legal advisor had negotiated for living expenses. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin reclaiming a sense of dignity. I started writing in a journal again, something I hadn't done in years, pouring out every thought, every memory, every pang of longing and betrayal. Somehow, putting words on paper made the pain a little more manageable. Despite all this progress, I still struggled with Chloe. Every message she sent was calculated, some sweet, some dismissive, all designed to make me doubt myself. She tried to guilt me, to paint herself as the victim in this story. At times, it almost worked. I'd sit alone at night rereading our childhood letters, remembering the moments we had shared, the secrets we had kept from everyone else. It hurt to reconcile the sister I loved with the one who had taken everything from me. Then there were moments of unexpected kindness from strangers. I met a woman named Linda at the shelter who reminded me that not everyone is untrustworthy. She was kind, patient, and generous in ways I hadn't experienced in years. She encouraged me to keep fighting, not just for the money, but for my self-worth. It was her voice on the phone one rainy evening that reminded me that surviving wasn't enough. I had to start living again, even if it felt impossible. Slowly, I began piecing together the life I had lost. I applied for jobs cautiously, knowing I couldn't rely on anyone else to support me. I started small, freelance writing, editing documents, helping local businesses with newsletters. But each assignment reminded me that I had skills, value, and worth. Every paycheck, no matter how modest, was a small victory, a reclaiming of control. But the emotional scars remained. I had nightmares about sleeping under bridges, about Chloe's face flashing before me with that casual cruelty I would never forget. I had panic attacks when money felt too scarce or when someone I trusted didn't follow through. And yet, every time I felt despair creeping in, I reminded myself that I had survived far worse than this. I had survived betrayal, abandonment, and poverty, and I could survive the lingering fear, too. One of the hardest moments came when I finally had to face Chloe directly in a mediation meeting. I remember walking into the room, my palms sweating, my voice shaking slightly as I tried to steady myself. She was calm, her smile still there, but there was a flicker of something, fear, maybe, or realization that she couldn't entirely hide. The meeting was tense, a quiet battlefield of words and glances. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, but I let every word I spoke carry the weight of years of struggle. I told her exactly what I had endured, step by step, and I could see her flinch at some of the details. The shame she had avoided for years finally started surfacing in subtle ways, in her eyes, in her posture, in the brief moments she faltered mid-sentence. It wasn't a grand, dramatic apology, and I didn't expect one, but it was enough to know that she could no longer pretend she hadn't done anything wrong. Around this time, I began reconnecting with old friends who had disappeared from my life when I fell on hard times. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of how to approach me after years of distance, but most were relieved to see me slowly getting back on my feet. Their support reminded me that even after regaining some stability, I quickly realized that money alone couldn't erase the years I had spent on the streets or the weight of betrayal I carried. The emotional wounds Chloe left were deeper than I had imagined. There were nights when I would sit in my small apartment, staring at the walls, and feel an overwhelming mixture of anger, grief, and disbelief. How could someone I loved so much hurt me so profoundly with no thought to the consequences? How could the sister who shared my childhood, my secrets, my laughter, spend years using my safety net as her personal playground while I fought to survive? I tried to focus on rebuilding myself. I started waking up early, taking long walks through the city to clear my mind and remind myself of the life I was reclaiming. I applied for more permanent jobs and eventually landed a position at a small publishing company where I could use the skills I had honed over the years. My colleagues were unaware of my past, and in a way, that was a relief. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to justify the gaps in my resume or the hardships I had endured. I could just be Emily, the person I wanted to be, not the one Chloe had tried to destroy. Yet, as much as I tried to bury the past, Chloe kept surfacing in unexpected ways. Friends would mention seeing her, or I'd notice her on social media posts, always smiling, always appearing to live a life of ease. Each sighting stirred up old feelings, jealousy, frustration, and an almost unbearable sadness. I found myself wondering if she even remembered what she had done, or if she had convinced herself it was justified somehow. The thought that someone so close could treat me this way and still carry on as though nothing had happened was almost more painful than the financial loss itself. I decided to confront my emotions head on. I started therapy for the first time in my life. Talking to someone who listened without judgment, someone who could help me unpack the betrayal and the trauma of homelessness, was transformative. It was there I realized that my anger wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about safety, about the belief that family is supposed to protect you. Chloe had shattered that belief, and the resulting fear and skepticism I felt toward people in general was a natural response. Through therapy, I learned to separate the actions of one person from the entire world, and slowly I began to rebuild my capacity for trust. During this period, I also discovered that forgiveness wasn't about excusing Chloe's actions. It was about freeing myself from the constant weight of bitterness. I didn't have to speak to her or reconcile with her to find peace. I could acknowledge what she had done, accept that it couldn't be changed, and choose to move forward anyway. That decision was empowering. It gave me a sense of agency I hadn't felt in years, a realization that my life was mine to reclaim regardless of her choices. One day, while volunteering at the shelter, a young woman approached me. She was timid, with the haunted look of someone who had spent nights in fear and uncertainty. She reminded me so much of myself when I first became homeless. She asked me how I had survived, how I had found the strength to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Her question struck me deeply. I realized that my story, painful and humiliating as it was, had value beyond my own life. My experiences could help someone else feel less alone, less defeated. It was then I decided to share my story selectively, using it to encourage and uplift others who were struggling in silence. Writing became my therapy as well as my voice. I started journaling again, chronicling my journey from homelessness, betrayal, and despair to survival, healing, and cautious hope. Each page was a testament to my resilience, a record of the nights I had endured, the streets I had navigated, and the inner strength I had discovered. I wrote not just to remember, but to transform my suffering into something meaningful. I wanted to honor my own journey and, in a small way, help others see that even in the darkest moments, there is a path forward. Rebuilding my life also meant facing practical challenges. I had to reestablish credit, navigate the bureaucracy of housing and employment, and manage finances I had never handled on my own. Every small success, a paid bill, a stable apartment, a completed project at work, was monumental. I realized that independence wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming control over my life. Every decision I made, no matter how minor, was a step toward the future I had lost years ago. Chloe continued to be a shadow in my life. I had to make conscious choices to limit contact, filter messages, and set boundaries. Even when people tried to encourage reconciliation, I held firm. I knew I couldn't risk my emotional well-being for the sake of appearances or the hope of an apology that might never come. Protecting myself became a priority, and in doing so, I discovered the importance of self-respect. I learned that it's possible to care for someone deeply while still refusing to let them harm you again. As the months passed, I slowly started building a circle of friends and allies who were supportive, trustworthy, and genuine. These weren't people who owed me anything. They were people who chose to stand by me. I realized that family isn't always defined by blood, and sometimes the people you choose to surround yourself with become more like family than those who are related by birth.
It was a comforting realization, and it gave me hope that my life could be rich and full even without Chloe's presence. One evening, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Chloe. Her words were carefully crafted, apologetic on the surface, but I could sense the hesitation and defensiveness lurking beneath. She admitted to taking the trust fund and expressed regret, but there was no acknowledgement of the years I...
Rebuilding my life wasn't a straight path. It was full of twists, setbacks, and moments that made me question whether I was really moving forward at all. Even after reclaiming part of my trust fund and securing an apartment, the shadow of those years on the streets lingered. I couldn't shake the memories, the biting cold, the loneliness, the constant anxiety about where I would sleep or how I would eat. Every sound of the city at night, the footsteps echoing down an empty alley, the distant hum of traffic, even the soft buzz of a neon sign reminded me of the nights I had spent feeling invisible, unworthy, and forgotten. But slowly, I began to take back the small pieces of my life. I started cooking for myself again, savoring the control over my own meals, even if it was just a simple pasta or rice dish. I arranged my apartment carefully, creating small pockets of comfort, cozy blankets, candles, a few plants that I nurtured every morning. Each little choice was a declaration. I was here, I was surviving, and I was creating a life that belonged to me. For the first time in years, my surroundings reflected something about who I truly was, not the chaos I had endured. Work became more than just a paycheck. It became a lifeline, a reminder that I still had value, that I still had skills worth sharing. My boss at the publishing company noticed my dedication and resilience, though she didn't know the full story of my past. She offered me more responsibilities, projects that allowed me to shine in ways I hadn't in years. I started to feel that familiar pride I had once known before homelessness took everything. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming identity, reclaiming agency, reclaiming dignity. The hardest part, however, wasn't financial or practical, it was emotional. I had to confront the reality that my relationship with Chloe might never return to anything resembling normal. The sister I had trusted implicitly had made choices that caused me unimaginable suffering. Accepting that she might never truly regret or recognize the pain she caused was one of the most difficult lessons of all. I had to grieve not just for the money, but for the sister I thought I had, the bond I had lost, and the innocence I had carried into adulthood that was shattered by her betrayal. At the same time, I began noticing subtle ways I had changed during those years. I was more cautious now, less trusting, more aware of the hidden intentions people might carry. Some might call it cynicism, but I saw it as survival. I had learned to read between the lines, to notice the small things that could indicate danger, betrayal, or deceit. That vigilance wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about ensuring that I never again found myself powerless in the face of someone I loved. One day, a small victory arrived that reminded me why perseverance mattered. A childhood friend, someone I hadn't seen since before I became homeless, reached out after seeing a post I had made online about volunteering at the shelter. She wanted to reconnect, to offer support, and to check in on me. At first, I was hesitant. Years of betrayal had made me wary, but I agreed to meet. Sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, I realized how much I had missed human connection that wasn't transactional or self-serving. The conversation flowed easily, filled with shared memories and gentle encouragement. It was a reminder that while Chloe had failed me, there were still people in the world capable of genuine kindness.
That reconnection sparked a series of small steps towards rebuilding relationships I had lost over the years. I reached out to other friends, slowly reestablishing bonds I had abandoned or had been forced to leave behind. Some responded warmly, others with hesitation, but each interaction reminded me that I was not defined by my years of hardship. I was defined by my actions now, by my choices, and by the way I chose to move forward. During this time, I also began reflecting on my parents and the lessons they had left behind. They had always stressed responsibility, integrity, and resilience. They had created the trust fund not as a reward, but as a safety net, a reminder that life can be unpredictable and that family sometimes needs to protect one another. It was ironic that the very person who was supposed to respect that gift had turned it into a weapon. Yet thinking about my parents' intentions helped me focus on what was truly important, using the resources I still had wisely, making decisions that aligned with my values, and living a life that honored their legacy, not Chloe's greed. The legal process had taken its toll, but ultimately it became a catalyst for growth. I began to see the power of persistence, of not letting fear or shame dictate the course of my life. Every document I gathered, every appointment I attended, every moment I stood firm in court was a lesson in resilience. I realized that while Chloe had taken years from me, she hadn't broken my spirit. She had underestimated my ability to endure, my ability to fight, and my ability to reclaim my life. One unexpected benefit of these experiences was the empathy I developed for others in similar situations. Walking through the city, I would notice people struggling with homelessness, young women afraid to sleep outside, older men walking with cautious steps through the cold night. I saw pieces of myself in each of them and felt compelled to help, even in small ways. I shared meals, offered guidance, and sometimes just listened. These moments of connection reminded me that suffering can be transformed into compassion and that my pain could have purpose beyond my own survival. Through all of this, Chloe remained a complicated figure in my mind. I wrestled with questions I knew might never have answers. Why she chose greed over family, why she ignored my suffering, why she didn't reach out until it was convenient. These questions could consume me, but I gradually learned to accept them as unanswerable truths. I realized that holding on to them only prolonged my pain. Letting go didn't mean I forgave her. It meant I refused to let her continue controlling my emotions. As I built a new life, I also discovered new dreams. I wanted stability.
Even as I rebuilt my life, I couldn't fully escape the lingering shadows of my past. There were nights when I would lie awake, thinking about the years I had spent homeless, the fear that had become constant, and the sister who had stolen not just my money, but my sense of safety. The memories came uninvited, the biting cold, the stares of strangers, the anxiety of wondering if I would have a place to sleep that night. Each recollection was sharp, raw, and yet, strangely, it reminded me of the resilience I had discovered in myself. Slowly, I began reclaiming the parts of my life that Chloe had taken from me. I started reconnecting with people I had lost touch with, reaching out cautiously to old friends and colleagues. Some remembered me fondly, others had moved on, but each conversation reminded me that I was capable of building meaningful relationships again. I realized that while Chloe had stolen a part of my past, she could not take my future. I had the power to shape the life I wanted, and no one could dictate it but me. Work became an anchor. I took on more responsibilities at the publishing company, proving to myself and others that I was capable and reliable. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with survival. It was about growth, creativity, and contribution. I started mentoring a few younger colleagues, sharing lessons I had learned not from books or training, but from life itself. They didn't know the full story of my past, but I realized I could impart strength and guidance simply by being present, consistent, and compassionate.
Financially, I worked meticulously to rebuild stability. I started small, managing expenses carefully, saving every possible dollar, investing cautiously, but gradually I began to regain control. Every paid bill, every deposit, every small victory was a reminder that I could manage my life even after losing everything. And yet, I knew that money alone could never erase the trauma, the betrayal, or the pain I had endured. The real work was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. Chloe remained a complicated presence in my life, though I limited contact. She sent occasional messages, sometimes apologetic, sometimes evasive, often leaving me with more questions than answers. I realized that her words could no longer have the power to destabilize me. I could acknowledge her existence, her choices, and her past betrayals without allowing them to control my emotions. It was a lesson in boundaries, self-respect, and emotional survival. Around this time, I discovered an unexpected source of strength, the community I had built through volunteering. At the shelter, I encountered women and men whose struggles mirrored some of my own. I shared my story selectively, offering guidance, encouragement, and support. Witnessing their resilience, their determination to survive, and their courage to rebuild inspired me. I realized that my experiences, painful as they were, had given me empathy, insight, and the ability to help others navigate hardship. This became one of the most meaningful aspects of my life, transforming personal suffering into collective empowerment. Yet, even as I found purpose in helping others, I struggled with feelings of grief and anger toward Chloe. Some nights the thought of what she had done to me, taking years of my life for her own comfort, consumed me. I wrestled with whether I would ever forgive her fully or whether that was even necessary. Slowly, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about her at all. It was about freeing myself from the heavy burden of resentment. Holding on to anger kept me tethered to my trauma, whereas letting go, without condoning her actions, allowed me to move forward unencumbered. Part of rebuilding also meant redefining my sense of family. I learned that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who choose to stand by you, support you, and respect your worth. Friends became like siblings, mentors became like parents, and strangers who offered kindness became anchors of trust. I discovered that while Chloe had failed to protect me, I could still create a network of care, stability, and love. These relationships became the foundation of my healing, offering me a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. One turning point came when I received a small inheritance from a distant relative I barely knew. It wasn't enough to solve every problem, but it was significant enough to remind me that life could offer unexpected opportunities. I used part of it to secure a more stable apartment, invest in my future, and start a modest emergency fund. It wasn't about wealth, it was about reclaiming security, autonomy, and the ability to make decisions without fear. Each choice, no matter how small, reinforced that I was capable of managing my life and protecting myself from harm. As I rebuilt, I also focused on my mental health. Therapy continued to be invaluable, helping me process trauma, understand patterns of trust and betrayal, and develop strategies for emotional resilience. I learned that healing isn't linear. It ebbs and flows, often taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but persistence, self-compassion, and support can guide you through even the darkest periods. I began to understand that surviving isn't just about enduring, it's about learning, growing, and reclaiming your sense of self in the aftermath of devastation. The relationship with Chloe reached a tentative stage where we exchanged minimal communication. She attempted to explain herself, offering excuses and justifications, but I realized that understanding her reasoning wasn't necessary. My life was no longer dependent on her recognition or apology. Instead, I focused on
Even after reclaiming my financial stability and rebuilding my day-to-day life, the emotional aftermath of Chloe's betrayal lingered. I realized that surviving homelessness and financial loss had changed me in ways that weren't immediately visible. I was stronger, yes, but I also carried scars that reminded me of vulnerability, trust broken, and the fragility of what I once believed family meant. Some nights I'd stare at the ceiling in my apartment, thinking about how easily someone I loved could hurt me and feel a shiver run through me. The realization was painful. Family is not always protective, and sometimes the people closest to you are capable of unimaginable betrayal. But I had learned something essential. I could survive it. I could endure emotional wounds, and I could still find a path forward. Slowly, I began building new routines that anchored me in stability and purpose. I started writing more seriously, creating a journal that chronicled not just my hardships, but the lessons I had learned along the way. Each page became a marker of resilience, a testament to the fact that I had endured, and a record of the strength I had discovered within myself. Writing gave me clarity. It helped me see not just the pain, but the growth, the transformation, and the small victories I often overlooked in my daily struggles. The work I did at the shelter had grown into more than volunteering. It had become a mission. I met people whose circumstances mirrored mine and saw the same fear and despair in their eyes that I had once carried. A young man named Marcus, for example, reminded me of my early days on the streets. He was wary of help, suspicious of kindness, and convinced that no one would care about him if he faltered. I spent hours talking to him, sharing my experiences selectively, and helping him navigate the first steps toward stability. Watching him begin to trust and regain confidence reminded me that my journey could have meaning beyond myself. My suffering could be transformed into guidance, empathy, and hope for others. At work, I continued rebuilding my career. I focused on writing and editing projects that challenged me, slowly gaining recognition for my skill and dedication. These successes were small victories, but to me, they were monumental. Each completed assignment, each positive review, each project delivered on time became a confirmation. I could create value, contribute meaningfully, and shape a life that wasn't defined by loss. Work became more than survival. It became a source of pride and a reminder that I was capable of more than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Chloe, as always, lingered in the background. She occasionally sent messages, some of them apologetic, others defensive. Reading them stirred up emotions I had worked hard to contain: anger, disbelief, sadness, and sometimes fleeting nostalgia for the sister I had once loved. But I realized that her words no longer had the power to destabilize me. I could read them, acknowledge them, and then set them aside without letting them dictate my emotional state. This was a lesson I had learned painfully. The power to protect your emotional well-being lies not in controlling others, but in controlling your own responses. Part of my healing also came from reconnecting with friends I had lost during my years of struggle. Some had drifted away out of fear or misunderstanding. Others had distanced themselves as my homelessness made them uncomfortable. But gradually I found people who were genuinely supportive, who valued my presence, and who treated me with respect. These relationships reminded me that while family can fail, chosen family, friends, mentors, allies, can provide stability, trust, and love that is just as meaningful. I realized that relationships built on mutual respect and empathy could heal the wounds left by betrayal. Financially, I began to think strategically about the future. I created a budget, started saving diligently, and explored ways to invest safely. I wanted a buffer, not just for emergencies, but as a form of empowerment. Having control over my finances meant having control over my life, and that was priceless. I began to feel a sense of security that had eluded me for years, a quiet confidence that no one could take what I had earned through my own resilience. I also began to explore long-term dreams I had once abandoned.
Writing, which had started as a personal refuge, became a potential career path. I attended workshops, connected with mentors, and began submitting pieces for publication. Each step forward reminded me that I wasn't defined by my past, but by the choices I made in the present. Slowly, I began envisioning a future that reflected my values, passions, and newfound strength. Therapy continued to play a central role in my emotional recovery. Speaking to someone who could guide me through the trauma helped me process the betrayal and develop strategies to rebuild trust was invaluable. I learned to identify patterns, understand my reactions, and set boundaries that protected me from further harm. Most importantly, I learned that healing isn't linear, it ebbs and flows, sometimes taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but persistence and self-compassion make the journey possible. One particularly emotional moment came when I visited the neighborhood where I had first lived on the streets. Walking past the alleyways, the parks, and the streets that had been my home for so long, I felt a wave of memories crash over me. I remembered the fear, the hunger, the humiliation, but I also remembered the resilience, the ingenuity, and the inner strength I had discovered. Standing there, I realized that those streets hadn't broken me, they had shaped me. They had taught me survival, endurance, and the value of self-reliance. And most importantly, they had shown me that even in the darkest times, I could find a way forward. During this period, I also reflected deeply on Chloe. I understood now that some people are incapable of recognizing the harm they cause, and that their actions often stem from their own flaws rather than a reflection of your worth. Accepting this was one of the hardest lessons, but it was essential. I could mourn the sister I thought I had, acknowledge the pain she caused, and still move forward without her validation.
Even after all I had endured, I still found myself haunted by the question of Chloe, why she chose to betray me, why she spent my trust fund without hesitation, and why she seemed incapable of truly seeing the consequences of her actions. It was a question I couldn't answer, and for a long time it consumed me. But over time, I began to understand that some people are not capable of change or full accountability, and that my energy was better spent reclaiming my life than trying to explain her choices. Acceptance, I realized, didn't mean forgiveness. It meant reclaiming control over my own emotions and refusing to be tethered to her actions any longer. Rebuilding my life had been a long, arduous process, but I was starting to feel a sense of stability I hadn't known for years. My apartment was modest but safe, my job provided consistent income and fulfillment, and my relationships with friends and mentors grounded me in ways that Chloe never had. I even began thinking about long-term goals that had once seemed impossible, saving for a future home, investing in education, and exploring creative projects that reflected my passions. These weren't grand gestures, they were small, intentional steps that reminded me that I had agency over my life, that my past didn't have to dictate my future. One day, I received an email that caught me completely off guard. It was from Chloe. I hesitated before opening it, bracing myself for excuses, manipulations, or attempts at guilt. But when I read it, I realized she was reaching out in a way she hadn't before. She acknowledged the harm she had caused, admitted she had acted selfishly, and expressed a vague desire to make amends. Her words were careful, almost mechanical, but they were the closest thing to a genuine apology I had ever received. My heart raced as I read them, and for a moment I felt the old anger stir. But then I reminded myself this wasn't about her, it was about me and whether I would let her intrusion affect my peace.
I chose not to respond immediately. I needed time to reflect, to separate my desire for closure from any lingering hope that Chloe would change or make things right. It was a powerful moment of self-awareness. I realized I no longer needed her validation, her apology, or her recognition to feel whole. My worth, my dignity, and my life were no longer dependent on her. That understanding brought an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from the emotional chains of her betrayal. As I continued my work at the shelter, I noticed how my experiences had transformed me. I was no longer just helping others survive, I was helping them rebuild, reclaim, and find dignity in the face of hardship. A young woman named Sophia, for example, reminded me of myself when I first became homeless. She was quiet, withdrawn, and wary of kindness, convinced that the world had nothing good to offer her. I shared my story selectively, helping her see that even after betrayal and loss, it was possible to regain stability and self-respect. Watching her begin to trust again, to take small steps toward rebuilding her life, was profoundly moving. It reminded me that my journey had purpose beyond myself. Meanwhile, I began exploring ways to solidify my financial independence further. I opened a savings account, started contributing to a retirement fund, and even experimented with small investments. Every decision was deliberate, every step forward a testament to my resilience. I realized that financial security was more than just money. It was empowerment. It was the ability to make choices without fear, to plan for the future, and to reclaim control over a life that had been derailed by someone I once trusted completely. Emotionally, I began to find balance. Therapy continued to help me process the lingering trauma of betrayal and homelessness. I learned strategies to cope with triggers, manage anxiety, and rebuild trust in myself and others. I discovered that healing isn't linear. It comes in waves, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly, but each step forward is meaningful. I began to feel proud not just of surviving, but of thriving, of creating a life that reflected my values, my strength, and my resilience. Despite this progress, I occasionally found myself thinking about Chloe with a mix of sorrow and detachment. I mourned the bond we had lost, the sister I had believed in, and the years stolen from me. But I also understood that her choices did not define me. I had reclaimed my narrative, my life, and my dignity. I had transformed pain into strength and betrayal into lessons I could carry forward. And though she remained a part of my past, she no longer had power over my present or future. One particularly poignant moment came when I revisited the alleyways, parks, and streets I had once slept on. The city that had once seemed harsh and unyielding now felt like a reminder of how far I had come. I could see the fear in my past self, the hunger, the anxiety, but I also saw resilience, courage, and determination. I realized those streets hadn't broken me, they had forged me. They had forced me to discover inner strength, resourcefulness, and the capacity to endure hardships that once seemed insurmountable. Standing there, I felt a profound sense of closure with that chapter of my life. Over time, I also began pursuing opportunities that brought me joy and fulfillment beyond survival. I opened writing workshops, joined creative communities, and even submitted a few articles to publications. Each small success, each acknowledgement of my work reminded me that I was capable of more than surviving. I could thrive, contribute, and create something new, something meaningful, and something authentically my own. The lessons I had learned through betrayal and hardship became guiding principles for how I approached relationships, work, and life. I became more discerning, more empathetic, and more intentional. I learned that self-respect and boundaries are essential, that resilience is cultivated through challenge, and that the human spirit is capable of incredible strength when tested. These lessons were not theoretical.
It took me a long time to reach the point where I could face Chloe one last time, not with anger, not with expectation, but with clarity and resolve. By now, I had rebuilt my life piece by piece through perseverance, patience, and self-reliance. I had a stable home, a meaningful job, friendships I cherished, and a sense of purpose that had once seemed impossible. But there was still a piece of the puzzle left unsettled, the lingering question of why, and the quiet need to close that chapter once and for all. I arranged to meet her in a neutral space, a small cafe far enough from both our neighborhoods that neither of us would feel at home. I remember walking in and seeing her sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee, fidgeting slightly with her hands. She looked older, more careful, perhaps even a little haunted, though I couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or just unease. My first instinct was to let the years of anger bubble to the surface, to remind her of every sleepless night I had endured while she lived in comfort. But I forced myself to breathe, to remain calm, and to remember why I had called this meeting in the first place, not to punish her, but to reclaim my peace. I sat down and looked at her, studying the face that had once been so familiar, so trusted. I began slowly, recounting the events that had changed both of our lives, the discovery of the trust fund, the years I had spent homeless, and the legal battles that followed. I spoke without exaggeration, without theatricality, simply stating the facts and my feelings. I could see her flinch at certain details, but I kept my voice steady, controlled. This wasn't about making her feel guilty, it was about asserting my truth, reminding both of us of the gravity of what had been done, and taking ownership of my own narrative. Chloe listened quietly, occasionally nodding, occasionally looking away. I could tell she had rehearsed what she might say, but for once I didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't try to manipulate the conversation. I had realized long ago that my power wasn't in confrontation, it was in living my life fully and letting the consequences of actions speak for themselves. She finally spoke, her voice tentative, admitting she had been selfish, short-sighted, and cruel. She apologized, though I could hear the hesitation and the lingering defensiveness. It was not a perfect apology, and it didn't erase years of pain, but it was a small acknowledgement of reality. I took a deep breath and said what I had been holding back for years. This isn't about your apology, it's about me reclaiming my life. I am no longer defined by your choices or your actions. I survived. I rebuilt. I am stronger than I ever imagined, and that strength doesn't depend on you. I could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a mix of guilt, fear, and perhaps admiration. But I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need validation or acknowledgement anymore. My life was mine, and I had earned the right to live it fully without her interference. Leaving that cafe felt surreal. I had faced the person who had caused so much pain and walked away with my dignity intact. For the first time, I felt the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by a quiet, powerful sense of closure. I didn't need to forgive her, and I didn't need to reconcile. I only needed to affirm that I had survived and that my future would be dictated by me, not by betrayal or loss. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a subtle shift in myself. The anger that had simmered for years no longer had a place in my daily life. I focused on cultivating joy, pursuing passions, and deepening meaningful connections. My apartment, once a small refuge, became a home filled with warmth, laughter, and memories I chose to create.
I continued writing, volunteering, and mentoring, using my experiences to guide others through hardships I once knew all too well. I began to see that my suffering, while painful, had given me empathy, wisdom, and a capacity for strength I might never have discovered otherwise. Financially, I became more confident and deliberate. I managed my resources carefully, invested thoughtfully, and ensured that my independence could never again be compromised. Each decision was a small declaration of control, a statement that I was capable of shaping my own life. I realized that security, both emotional and financial, was not something to take for granted. It was a foundation I had to cultivate